Okay, their participation. I'm talking about the scientists, and the quote I gave in the beginning, the scientists and doctors, they participated in what was one of the most infamous episodes of human suffering and death in the history of the human race. And no one predicted, and I've got some data here. Somewhere I mention it, but anyways, the core of Nazism was Jews were morally inferior. They couldn't find evidence of any physical inferiority. In fact, what they did was they wanted to set up a museum display, and therefore they asked in the camps, could you take 20 Jews that really looked like they were Jews, had extreme features, and then kill them and denude their body, take the bones, separate the bones, ship the bones to Berlin, and then we can put a display of an inferior race. So once we kill all the Jews, we want evidence that they're an inferior race. And so they started to do this. They started to kill many of those they thought were good examples of Jews, the stereotypic traits, and they defleshed their bodies and sent them to Berlin, and they looked and they looked and they could not find any trait that would distinguish them from anybody else. And so they never put up the exhibit. But they looked and they looked. They did comparisons of Jewish skeletons and non-Jewish skeletons. They looked and looked and looked and looked, and they just, we can't see any trait that's defining. We just can't find any trait. So the exhibition was never set up. I cover this in one of my books. In fact, I think one of those out here, my Jews and Morality, I cover that, which is an interesting case because they totally failed. Okay, why were they so negative to Christianity? Well, I mentioned several reasons. Another reason was they said Christianity was a bastard of Judaism and must be destroyed. And Hitler made a lot of very strong statements about Christianity. He absolutely detested Christianity. And here I mentioned the 5,000 or 5 million Polish Christians were murdered. And why oppose Christianity? Well, Christianity says what? The Christians are known for supporting the weak, the sick, the minorities of society, the people with problems. We're out there helping all kinds of people. And what did Hitler wanted? Well, not Hitler, but the scientists. What the scientists want to do? Kill them. So those people that the scientists wanted to kill, Christians wanted to go out and help. So they were dynamically opposed to their worldviews. And most of the opposition that I mentioned was from Christians. Ernst Haeckel, a leading Darwinist in Germany. The Origin of Species was first translated into German in Germany. And Ernst Haeckel was one of the leading scientists. He was a Christian, and he became a Darwinist and an atheist. And he was a leader of the German and as well as the American movement. In fact, his books were translated into English, and they're so common you can go to bookstores now and find them. And I have a whole set of his books, which paid almost nothing for because they're millions. And this was Haeckel's drawings. And you can see the first 6 were all, quote, human. The 6 below that were all apes. So you can see the lowest human was right above the highest ape. And so he said that basically we're evolved from apes, and some of us are not evolved very far from apes. And therefore, these are the races that we must kill. In fact, the highest up there is the Roman. That's actually from a Roman statue. And the highest race would be the Aryan race. And all the others were inferior races, even though these were human, he would acknowledge, but they were inferior race. And we looked at the slant here, forehead slant. You can see we evolved from fish, the theory. And if your forehead is slanted, that means you're part of an inferior race. So this is one of the measurements they used to determine if you were an inferior race. And by the way, when they did that with Jews and Poles and just about everybody else, they were all up here. So that test didn't work very well. So they said, well, let's drop it. It's not a very good test to determine inferiority. But that was widely accepted, and I've done a number of articles on that. And there's Joseph Mengele. He had an MD and a PhD in evolutionary biology. He was very committed to evolutionary biology. And what he wanted to do was prove evolution and figure out why some races were inferior, how to get blue eyes, so he injected blue dye into people how to get blue eye, yeah. So he injected blue dye in the eyes of people, which didn't turn out so well. In fact, none of his experiments turned out very well. And now he became one of the most wanted fugitives of Nazism. But when his son interviewed him, because his son knew where he was, in South America, his son asked about what he did and why. He said, look, these people were all destined to die anyways. Medicine may as well learn something before they're killed. So I wasn't, somebody else would have done it if I didn't. You've heard that excuse before. Somebody else would have done it, and I was just trying to learn medicine. And we assume he must be a horrible person, but yet in many ways when you read about his life, and I'll give you one quick example, you can see that he was doing what he thought was necessary as a committed Darwinist. And one example which shows his personality was not the evil guy, and a lot of people are concerned about this because we paint these people as evil people, and they were not evil people. They were people who were doing what they thought was right, even though we recognize it as evil. They weren't apart from us. They weren't different from us. But Joseph Mengele, he bought a house near a curve, and people said, that is a dangerous curve. What if there's an accident and somebody's hurt? What would you as a doctor do? Well, I would help the person, of course. But what if you were exposed and ended up going back to Germany and hung? Well, I would take the risk. I'm a doctor. I help people who are sick or injured. So if that occurred, I would help them even though it would put my life in jeopardy. That's what doctors do. We are willing to give our life to help those who need it. And I'm willing to do that as well. And so we often picture him as an evil person, and of course, crimes against humanity is what he was wanted for, but he really believed in Darwinism, and he really believed he was doing something good. He was misled. So he was not evil, he was misled. And people, by the way, who knew him said he was a nice person. In fact, he was called an angel in the death camp because he was really nice to the children until he started to operate on them without any anesthesia. And he did horrible things to so many people. But he did them, he felt, to help understand inferior races and evolution. And the example he gave is, some of you have had surgery. Look at what they're doing. They're cutting your body open. They're going in there and taking things out. They're doing awful things to you. You may be sore for weeks or months, but in the end, it is for your good. So yes, we're doing awful things, but in the end, it is for the good for humanity. And so he justified what he did. So he himself didn't see that he did anything wrong. He was just doing what's right. So what was the problem that was wrong? Darwinism, that worldview. And it's a worldview. It's the way we see the world. And it's the way he saw the world.